Hello, my name is Dr. Andrew Jenks. I am the instructor for History 400, and the course is about the history of science and technology. What I wanted to do today was to tell you a little bit about myself and my philosophy regarding this course. One thing I think to note here that's sort of interesting is that we are dealing with a course in the history of science and technology, so it seems completely appropriate that this should be an online course that uses computer technology as an alternative kind of delivery mechanism for the content that we'll be examining in this course. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have a PhD in Russian history and history of technology. I used to write about history of science and technology as a journalist in Washington, D.C. during the 1990s, and I became fascinated in the connections between science, technology, culture, politics, and society. And that is one of the major themes of this course, is sort of crossing boundaries between science and technology and culture and society and politics. We'll be examining how these kinds of things intersect across a broad swath of chronological time. My interest in all of this was excited also by, historically speaking, in the Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution occurred in 1917, and the Russians had this great hope that somehow science and technology would be their salvation. And by the way, that's not an unusual notion. We see this idea beginning with the origins of the scientific revolution in early modern Europe. We'll talk more about the chronology of this course later on. This idea that science and technology can solve any problem and give us the power to manipulate and control our environment. It's a major theme of this course, something to think about, and it's an idea that is still with us in our society today. And one of the punchlines in all of this, I'll be stressing this over and over again, is that the belief that we can control the world with science and technology often actually leads to precisely the opposite. The absence of control. In other words, the idea that we can use science and technology to control our environment and make it better oftentimes is a delusion. And in fact, what happens is that the world that we create with science and technology is less controllable rather than more controllable. Now, I think you all can get a sense of this if you ride on the 405 highway at rush hour with all these very complex technologies called cars. With all of their GPS and all the rest of it. And in fact, what is created on 405 on most days is absolute chaos and a sense of absence of control. And it's this feeling that we can't control the world despite science and technology that also is at the center of this course, in addition to the idea of looking at how science, technology, culture, and politics all interconnect with each other. Now, as you can tell from these comments that I've made, we will be talking about potentially an awful lot of things in this course. Not just science and technology per se, but also how it affects people in their daily lives, how it has been used in the political sphere to create nuclear bombs, to create new kinds of technologies that can generate untold amounts of wealth, how it creates new forms of power in the form not only of different kinds of weapons, but also in computer technology that we're using for this course. At any rate, these are all the topics that we'll be discussing in this course. All right, we'll have occasion to elaborate many of these things and other things as we proceed through the course. I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about my own research interest of late. I wrote a book a couple years ago called The Cosmonaut Who Couldn't Stop Smiling. It's a biography of the world's first cosmonaut, the first space traveler, Yuri Gagarin, who went into space on April 12, 1961. So I wrote a biography of this guy who, for his time, was perhaps the most photographed and famous person in the world through the 1960s. I wrote about him not only because he was an interesting figure, but because he embodied this idea of scientific and technological progress, literally shooting into beyond Earth's atmosphere, into orbit and into space as a projection of this idea that we could go, as that old show Star Trek that none of you know about probably used to put it, where no man has gone before. And this is what fascinated me about this character, Yuri Gagarin, and the culture that he came from, that he went to places that no one could go before. And in going to these places, somehow our lives would be made better. So I investigated that idea in this biography, and I tried to use this individual as a kind of window into the culture from whence he came. Now I am doing another project that builds on top of that, which is a history of space exploration, collaborative space exploration in the 1970s and 80s, particularly between those Cold War combatants, the United States and the Soviet Union. So I've done research in Russia and in the NASA archives last year in order to investigate the politics, the cultural ramifications, the interesting kinds of bedfellows that got created in this attempt to try to collaborate in the exploration of space and somehow make space useful for all of humanity. And by the way, these efforts in the 1970s and 80s created the International Space Station, which is one of the few remaining examples of close collaboration between Russia and the United States today, given the resurgence or recrudescence of the Cold War that many of you may have heard of with regard to the United States and Russia. At any rate, that's a little bit about myself, my own research interest. That will probably feature prominently along the way during this course. I can't help but inject my own interest into the subject matter of this course, and perhaps you will grow a little bit tired of that, but that's okay. You can also tell me about your own research interest, your own personal interest, and your own personal connections to technology. It's all fair game in this course. And hopefully we can all learn together about different ways that technology and science have impacted us in our daily lives, and also the historical roots of that impact.